On a quiet stretch of Mendon Street in the old Chestnut Hill section of Blackstone, rising from rolling pastures crossed with sturdy stone walls, there appears, like a vision out of time, a sprawling, splendid, and remarkably well-preserved historic farmstead, the Southwick-Daniels Farm. A visitor to the site, strolling among the red barn and outbuildings, or idling their way through the old white farmhouse, would be forgiven for thinking they had stepped back into the past. From its bucolic setting to its architectural features and charming furnishings, the Southwick-Daniels Farm exhibits a singular and striking standard of historical integrity. What makes the story of the Southwick-Daniels Farm even more unique, however, is the tireless work done by Justine Southwick Brewer and others in the Daniels Farmstead Foundation to safeguard the memory and stories of those who lived on, developed, and gave character to this plot of land. Justine's own mother, Clarice Adelaide Daniels Southwick, was among the last generation to grow up on the farm and experienced the hard work and joy of living the simple life in rural New England. To this end, the Daniels Farmstead Foundation has done much more than preserve the property and its artifacts as a living museum for the general public. In collecting photographs, documents, and oral testimonies from members of the family that inhabited the farm for 2 centuries, it has made their lives and experiences colorful and immediate in ways that history rarely can be. In this sense, the Southwick-Daniels Farm provides visitors with nothing short of a vivid look into the past, and more precisely, a part of the past that is often overlooked in the history of the Blackstone Valley. Even as the American Industrial Revolution transformed the region in the late 18th and 19th centuries, there were corners of the corridor where the agricultural lifestyles of the first New Englanders prevailed, and their traditions and values thrived. Family farms where the work of each generation strengthened their connection to the land and to each other. The story of the Southwick-Daniels Farm begins in 1793, when a man named Nahor Staples sold the property to Seth Southwick. Nahor was a direct descendant of Abraham Staples, one of the town of Mendon's original settlers, and a farm on this plot of land had been in their family since 1685. A 1798 federal tax census indicates that Seth Southwick's farm included a barn, cornhouse, and one-story home. Incredibly, this dwelling, believed to have been built around 1750, survives as the so-called L of the existing farmhouse, which encompasses the kitchen, pantry, dining room, and a shed across the north facade with a sink, set kettles for washing, woodshed, and buttery. When Seth Southwick died in 1835, his will stipulated that 1/3 of the farm would be left to his widow Alpha, and the other 2/3 to his heirs and their spouses. His daughter Rachel and her husband Absalom Daniels purchased the shares of Seth's other 4 children, and shared the home with Alpha until her eventual death. It would be their descendants that occupied the house from then on, and thus the Southwick Farm acquired its second moniker. Records from the time of Seth's death indicate that the farm comprised 146 acres and included 5 cows, 1 bull, 1 horse, and 3 pigs, as well as stores of hay, straw, corn, rye, and white beans, providing a rare glimpse into the makeup of the property at the time. Additionally, it is believed that the corn crib, sitting just beside the L, was constructed during Rachel and Absalom's stewardship of the farm. In 1850, the farm passed to their son Hiram D. Daniels, then still a teenager, who would go on to marry Elizabeth Thayer in 1866. Hiram transformed the farmstead during his tenure, electing to focus on raising cows rather than crops and erecting a large barn for this purpose. Hiram's most significant contribution, however, would prove to be the construction of another outbuilding, a cider mill, to accompany the farm's small apple orchard and to service the needs of other farmers in the community. Today, it is easy to overlook the importance and ubiquity of apple cider for the bulk of American history, and especially its prominence in rural New England. Cider was easy to make, preserved well, and served as a slightly alcoholic and thus cleaner alternative to water. Apple cider vinegar, as well, has many applications and proven health benefits. Simply put, cider was a staple of Americans' diets, and its production was a lucrative staple of American culture. In fact, after Hiram D. Daniels' untimely death in 1875, his widow Elizabeth was able to run the farm independently, owing not only to her grit, but to her adroitness in operating the cider mill's 2 original presses, which are no longer extant. They say she was a great businesswoman, attested her granddaughter Clarice Daniels Southwick over a century later. They had a dairy farm with cows, horses, big gardens, and above all a cider mill. That's where she made her money, with the cider mill. Another interesting relic on the farm dating to this period is the granite water trough nestled beside the corn crib. In the 1860s, Hiram hired Daniel Simmons, noteworthy for building the nearby Saranac and Rolling dams, to perform some work on the property. He expertly chiseled this trough and was possibly responsible for a well and cistern on the property as well. Visitors to the farmstead can appreciate for themselves the craftsmanship performed by this important figure in the history of the Blackstone Valley. Although worn smooth by age and the elements, the trough is just as serviceable today as it was then. In the late 19th century, the farm passed to Hiram and Elizabeth's son, Hiram T. Daniels. Hiram T. married Carrie Mabel Stearns in 1896, and the couple raised 6 children on the farm during the early 20th century. Thanks to the painstaking and passionate work of Justine Southwick Brewer, Carol McPherson, and others associated with the Daniels Farmstead Foundation, a great deal is known about this period of the farm's history. They collected countless photographs, news clippings, and most crucially, the personal reminiscences of 2 of Hiram T.'s children, Doris Dot Daniels King and Justine's own mother, Clarice Adelaide Daniels Southwick. What emerges from their work is a clear and evocative impression of traditional New England farm life, stretching into the modern era, of the simple life in the final years before electricity lit the home and automobiles filled the carriage house. During his proprietorship of the farm, Hiram T. expanded the apple orchard and improved the productive capacity of the cider mill. Farmers from as far as Woonsocket, Rhode Island, came with cartloads of apples to be turned into cider and vinegar. Dot remembered the kitchen at times being so full of burlap sacks filled with apples, brought indoors so they would not freeze, that her mother would have to climb over them to reach the wood stove. It was also during this time that Hiram T. constructed the farm's familiar stone walls, a result of clearing the fields of rocks and boulders in order to make them more fertile. To accomplish this, he relied on a fair amount of dynamite, as well as Amos and Andy, a pair of oxen he considered more dependable than horses. Clarice recollected her father, quote, going to a big rock, drilling a hole by hand, putting the dynamite in, lighting the fuse, and saying to us, "Run." As Dot attested, he'd blast the rock and cut it in pieces, and he'd pick them up and put them on the drag and make a wall, and those walls are still there. What comes across most vividly in their testimonies, apart from a stirring sense of the past, is the persistence of Yankee values inherited from their forebears on the farm. Things like thrift, ingenuity, never fussing, and always being thankful. Clarice recalled cutting down their own cedar tree every year for Christmas and stringing it with both popcorn and cranberries from the farm. They would attach candles to the tree, but perhaps wisely, never lit them. Dot reminisced about such things as warming soapstones on the wood stove and placing them in their beds to stay warm in the winter. She also recounted an instance in which her father had to have an emergency appendectomy on the dining room table, and she was charged with holding a lantern steady for the visiting doctor. It is, however, the more commonplace memories of rising early and working hard that seem the most rewarding. Those were the happy days, Dot had said. We had our chores to do and we did 'em. Everybody was always satisfied with everything we did. Hiram T. and Carrie Daniels' youngest son, Aidan Thayer Charlie Daniels, maintained the farm through much of the 20th century. Apart from raising peaches and haying the fields made fertile by his father, Charlie continued work in the cider mill. He operated the so-called turntable press seen here, built by the famed Boomer and Bosscher Press Company in Syracuse, New York, and installed in the mill around 1890. The press was originally powered by a steam engine, but by Charlie's time it had been replaced by a Ford engine that's still in the main barn today. Although cider has not been processed in the mill since about 1950, the pungent smell of vinegar still greets any visitor who walks through its door. Charlie lived on the farm until his death in 1993, leaving it to his eldest sister, Dot. Dot turned over decision-making responsibilities to Justine, her niece, in 2003, shortly before her death in 2005 at the age of 105. It was in 2003 that Justine and others, including Jesse Deacon and Paulette Boyko, founded the Daniels Farmstead Foundation Incorporated, in order to preserve this one-of-a-kind historic property and ensure that it become a living museum as well as a venue for community gatherings. The farm also features an organic garden and now hosts the farmers market on Sundays, July through October. Of course, it also continues to serve as a meeting place and resource for Justine's children, grandchildren, and other descendants of the Southwick-Daniels family. Of course, what makes the Southwick-Daniels Farm unique is much more than its remarkable historic and architectural integrity over more than 2 centuries of continuous use and development. Considering the extent to which the Daniels Farmstead Foundation and the descendants of the Southwick-Daniels family have worked to document and honor the lives and experiences of those who lived on the farm, it is unique for being a place where the human dimension of the past feels astonishingly close at hand. It is a place where it's possible to measure the work of each generation and the changing landscape, and to know their stories intimately. It is a place where the traditions and values of Old New England have been passed down to the present through a single family. And perhaps most importantly, it is a place and a setting charged with history and reverence where that continues to happen.